This is not directly related to it, but you did touch on the language, script, and how it has evolved and so on. So I just wanted to ask, I mean, I've posted my question in the chat. You can take a look. So my question is, what is the academic motivation behind the current nascent movement to change Kannada script? Basically, a bunch of people who are advocating Lipi Badlavane. Are there any advantages to it? Are you familiar with the work of, or the linguistics work of Dr. D.N. Shankar Bhatt? Do you have any views?
Yeah, I'm quite aware of D.N. Shankar Bhatt's work. I have read all his books. And I mean, there are some of the aspects that I agree with his analysis about the grammar. And there are things that I don't agree. So in language or script, it is mostly because of what you get used to. I mean, if you go back 1,000 years ago, for example, in 10th century Kannada, there was a distinction of using what's that? There was indeed some of the words that were used in what we call tadbhava, that they were commonly used, and at some point of time the tatsamams came in. They were also got the tadbhavas got replaced. For example, it was common to write rishi for rishi in 10th century. But you know, as centuries go, you cannot really predict how these things change, and the word rishi also came in, and it was started to be used as rishi only. So now you consider rishi as to be the right version to write, and rishi not the right version in the standard Kannada. But yeah, in specific places you will use rishi where you are writing a poetry in a specific style, right? So given that, I mean, you can see that lots of what you call typographical errors in the previous inscriptions also. So it's no telling, but generally my view is you go by what you find yourself around. So for example, some of the, as I was talking about the tadbhavas, right? There is a word called yatra in Sanskrita, which is going to a place, travel, etc. It has come to Kannada as a tadbhava as jatre, and then we also have yatre. So, but now in Kannada we use these two words distinctly, because yatre we say for something, mostly a religious travel to a temple, yatre. But jatre is a village fair, right? Those kinds of distinctions happen in languages. You cannot really stop that. Generally, the changes in languages happen much more slowly over time, and not by force and saying, okay, you don't use these words or you use these words, those kinds of things. Now I think they're happening a bit faster because of the reason being the media and TV, right? So they are sort of enforcing people, not enforcing, I would say, fasten these changes, right? They are making these changes to occur much faster than before. Normally, something that would have taken a decade or two to get established. Now you hear some usages, maybe they are incorrect on TV, and people, for good or bad, they latch on to that. So that's what it is. So I don't know whether I answered your question, but
so there was. So are you saying that there is some merit in what they're proposing, and there is some merit in making some changes to the script, and not all of them? Or what is it?
No. I'm not talking about the script change. I'm not in favor of a script change. What I said was about Shankar Bhatta's work on grammar. So grammar is the way he says, okay, now you don't have to follow Sanskrita grammar to the T when you are describing Kannada grammar, which I agree. And then he says, okay, some of the words, some new words can be taught from Kannada, which is also true in the sense, right? If there is a concept that comes today, which does not have a word anywhere, right? It's coming from English somewhere or whatever. You can think of a word in Kannada, it's quite possible. So you can consider doing that. But when you do that, actually some some judicious analysis has to be done rather than trying to propose a word and without knowing what it is. And that's all I'm saying. But I am not really in favor of saying, okay, you stop using certain letters of the alphabet. I'm definitely not for that. I'm for whatever is being used in the last 50 years. I think that's fine. And we know that some words, some letters were taken off from the alphabet because they were never used, right? For example, the old Ra and Ra. So these were used in Kannada 10 or 6 centuries ago. So they were written for another 4 or 5 centuries in written Kannada, but we don't know whether they were used in pronunciation. But after 18th and 19th century, they got dropped. So it really takes a long time for that to happen. If you see some words like kathe and kate, now they're considered equal, and both forms being correct, right? So, but when people see some as incorrect, right? If there is a sizable amount of people who think something as incorrect, so then I will say that is incorrect.
Okay. So yeah, final follow-up. Okay, that's regarding the grammar and how the language has evolved. What are your views on the script change? Are there advantages to it?
I think.
What's the motivation other than political, if any?
I think let's not talk, because I think there may be other people asking some other related questions over here. We can talk. Definitely, you can message me and we can talk about it. It's something that interests me as a Kannada speaker and a writer. So definitely we will.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Anirudh. Anybody else? I see that there are some questions in the chat. I don't know whether. Okay.
Hello, I have a question here.
Yeah.
Could you please elaborate a little bit about what you've seen in old Kannada inscriptions and the progression of the language? As you mentioned in your talk, languages evolve, and in current usage, a lot of Kannada has borrowed words and phrases from other languages. So if you look at the old Kannada, how much Sanskrit content was there as compared to today? Thank you.
Okay, sure. I think Kannada has had a very much influenced by both Samskrita and Prakrita for a very long time. Even in old Kannada, there is a lot of Samskrita. Definitely, there is a lot of Samskrita. Today also there is much of Samskrita vocabulary. What we can see is some of the Kannada vocabulary or some of the Prakrita vocabulary that was there in old Kannada has been lost. So some of the like words came from Samskrita to Kannada in 2 ways. One is through what I call the Maharashtrian Prakrita, which was spoken, I think, concurrently with Kannada in a large area of now North Karnataka all the way up to Nashik. So that is where the words, that's why you also see lots of Kannada words in what we know to be Kannada words in Marathi as well. So Maharashtri Prakrita, so their words came to Kannada through Maharashtri Prakrita. So that is one. And then later on, they also came from Samskrita. So because the use of Samskrita increased because it's just like English today, right? For most of us who are speakers of Kannada and speakers of other Indian languages, we may end up conversing with each other in English because we don't have, he may not know Kannada, I may not know Marathi and things like that, right? So we end up speaking in English. So Samskrita would have been something like that, number one. And Samskrita it was always useful to know Samskrita when you go to study things that you wanted to, because all the Shastra texts, just like today, medicine texts, engineering texts, we all went through in English. So similarly, all the Shilpa Shastra, and if, let's say, for example, there's a playwright from Tamil Nadu, and he's writing a play and he wants to see how he has to do that. If he wants to read Natya Shastra is in Sanskrit. Somebody, a musician from Odisha, if they want to do something, and then if they want to see how their current music compares to what was there, Raga Lakshana, they want to read something, so the texts are in Sanskrit. So that is how Sanskrita went much larger as a studied language, even when it was not spoken. We don't think in Karnataka people spoke Sanskrita, but people who needed Sanskrita learned it because they had these texts of mathematics, texts of Shilpa, texts of Jyotisha, and all those things easily available in that. So after those texts were being written in the respective languages, then the importance of Sanskrita reduced to all these areas, right? That is when, by the time, a lot of infusion of words, vocabulary had happened. So we don't see a reason to change, even though there is word, very, very commonly used Kannada words are taken from Sanskrita, very, very commonly used. There may be alternative words that are not from Sanskrita source, but it doesn't really matter. So as a change, I think as a change from what was there in 10th century, style definitely has changed. The language definitely has changed going from then to now. But that is how all languages change. Even if you look at other languages, the difference between Old Kannada and New Kannada probably is something like what you see from Sanskrita to Hindi. All right. Just that we call it the same language, but in case of Hindi, in Hindi, it's become, there is something called Apabhransha stage, and then becoming to Hindi and Bengali and things like that. But we call it, okay, Old Kannada, New Kannada. In Tamil also they call it Old Tamil, New Tamil. But there is a lot of evolution even in these languages as well. I hope I got to some of the aspects that you wanted to know.
Sir, Namaste. I was having one question related to the Mahaprana influence on Kannada. From so many sources, I have came to know that in Kannada, Mahaprana doesn't exist. And coming to the works of D. Shankar Bhatt also, he also excluded Mahaprana in his books. For my knowledge extent, what's your view? Or is it really we want to exclude Mahaprana from Kannada?
I mean, I don't say we want to exclude Mahaprana from Kannada, because we see it's a question whether if people are speaking it or not. I see people are speaking it. There are dialectical variations within Kannada where Mahaprana is dropped. I don't deny that, but it is not all through Karnataka. So when it is not all through Karnataka, when it is not through all the dialects of Kannada, I say we should not be dropped. So that's as simple as that. We know that many of the words that, most of the words that use some Mahaprana are coming from Sanskrita or Prakrita, of course, and both are same source. And there are used in some other Anukarana songs, such as like Jhana Jhana, Bhana Bhana, Dhana Dhana. So this is what the Keshi Raja and others give in their book, saying, okay, all the Mahaprana songs come from Sanskrita, otherwise they come in these Anukarana abhyayas. So does that sound exist? Yes, it does. Does it mean anything? It may not. It means something when you are writing in a context, right? So that sound exists. I am actually for introducing some symbols that were not there in Kannada earlier, but they have to actually use now. Like, for example, coffee, right? You cannot write coffee in Kannada as of now. It will become coffee if you write. So people introduce those two dots under that. So I would say we should make it standard that when you are writing like coffee, you have to write those two dots. And we cannot easily write things like such as English sounds such as apple. You cannot write. So I'm in fact for changes in the script that can represent those things, because people are using those words as though they are Kannada. That's right.
Thank you, sir. Namaste.
Go on, please. Namaste.
I'll join little later. Sorry for that. Actually, my question is, what are the earliest epigraphical evidence found regarding temple dance or any mandapa dance or any court dance of royal court dance in southern India?
Okay, as far as I have seen, I don't claim to have read all the inscriptions or throughout. There are references to dance from 9th century, definitely. I don't know if they. I showed some inscriptions where they are talking about the music emanating from houses in 450. So it is. It has existed from then, definitely. It doesn't talk about dance, and about 9th century works talk about the works from 9th century talk about music and dance. And Chalukya, definitely Chalukya, later Chalukya and Hoysala inscriptions do talk about the dance being performed, and some specific dancers. And there are descriptions in literature from Pampa, who is the earliest Kannada poet. He's from the 9th century, 10th century. So at that time, definitely it was there. So we don't know what was there before that. So whether it was performed in temples, I can't tell. But all Hoysala temples have this place called Rangamantapa, which is nothing but a dance stage. They are there in Chalukya temples also. I seen it in Madhukeshwara temple in Banavasi, which is which is older, but I don't know whether the Navaranga was a later addition. Many of the temples, what happens is, there's a temple, they will add the Rangamantapa, they will add something else, the Pradakshina Patha and all that over time. So I don't know if Madhukeshwara temple was extended during the Chalukyas or Hoysalas.
I have two questions. Very interesting talk with loads of information. Thank you for that. One question is, do inscriptions have a specific format, and has it been followed all over India? Like, what I'm trying to ask is, just like we say Sankalpa, it has a particular format. You mentioned the place, you mentioned the time, so on and so forth. So is there a common format that has been used while writing an inscription?
I don't know whether it's a very very strict format, but mostly most of them start as Swasti, and during this year, that's how they start. Like, in the this year, this date, like the date, giving the date, and they will say who is doing something, doing the dana. Sometimes they will go with a very, very elaborate description of the particular king before the actual deed comes. Hoysala temples have very, very nice inscriptions about like 6-8 feet tall. Most of it is the description of the family, and then in the end there will be, okay, this temple was built, and the king or whoever, right, is donated this village. So meaning all the revenue coming from that particular village will go to the expenses of the temple. That is how it is. And sometimes they'll say, okay, the extra money will be utilized for repairs and this type of things. But this is general. I think some places where some things might be dropping, as they say, some very old inscriptions, they don't have all this data. They'll just say, okay, in the 5th year of King Ashoka, blah blah blah. So that's how they go. I think by 4th, 5th century, it became very standard to have this type of format. Like for the earliest Kadamba inscriptions, for example, the Mayura Varma's inscription in Chandravalli near Chitradurga, it just says, okay, it just goes like a line. He repaired a tank in the town. So that's what it is. It's very short. The older inscriptions are generally short, but once you come to 4th, 5th century, I think they're pretty long, and you have all this pillar inscription. You know about the Meherali inscription, right, in Delhi. They're all pretty long and elaborate. Then there's some of the Gupta's inscription, etc.
Yeah, thank you. The second question that I had is regarding the Sindhu Saraswati civilization and the undeciphered symbols. I was reading somewhere that something equivalent to a Rosetta Stone exists for that, but it hasn't been deciphered. Is that true, or can you elaborate a little bit more?
I mean, I don't know if it exists. I think what they say is if they find something like that, it will be very useful. But I don't know whether it's being found. Like when they say Rosetta Stone, it is like on the same inscription, there the same material is written in 2 different languages or 2 different scripts. That's how they sort of deciphered some of these Ashoka's inscriptions too, right? There was, in Afghanistan, the same inscription text was written in 2 scripts, one called Kharoshti and one called Aramaic, so which is a West Asian script. So then I think Aramaic was already known, so they read that, and from that they were able to get to the text of reading, what is it, Kharoshti.
Thank you, sir. One last request. Is it possible for you to share the slides and also any references that you use?
Definitely. I will be able to use the share slides, and most of the references are that in Kannada that I had were either from the Epigraphia Karnatica volumes or a couple of books by Chidananda Murthy. I very highly recommend, if you any Kannada speakers here, to read that one called Shasana Sahitya Sanchaya. I don't know who the writer is, but it's basically, and there is one called Shasana Padya Manjari. So the Shasana Padya Manjari has lots of poems, only verses from various inscriptions over 10 centuries of inscription. And the Shasana Sahitya Sanchaya has very, very interesting inscriptions from all the way from Kadambas to probably 15th, 16th, 17th century. Those 2 books I highly recommend. And there are interesting things from Chidananda Murthy. He has, I think any book by Chidananda Murthy will have something interesting about inscriptions at places. There is I think there's one book by Chidananda Murthy just talking about I don't know whether it's Chidananda Murthy or Arsati Narayana, talking about music and dance in inscriptions. So that because I'm very much interested in music, I found it very topical and very useful. So those are books. And then Epigraphia Karnatica, if you go, you will find they are generally arranged on districts. So each district has a volume or 2. For example, in Hasana, there is one volume on Hasan district inscriptions and one full volume on inscriptions from Shravanabelagola. So because that's the amount of inscriptions is so high there. So you can go there. Initially, if you don't understand Halagannada, it may be a bit tough, but as you start reading, you will get your way through.
Thank you.
So I had a question.
Sure.
Thank you very much for this such an engaging talk. I really loved it. So I have a question. Which is a very basic question. Whenever we look at any inscription, we consider it to be true. So are there reasons to believe that that an inscription can be not true or false?
There are some reasons. Number one is, many inscriptions will go a bit hyperbole. They can. Generally when they're going on praise, right? They may say things like, okay, generally, they'll say, okay, the conqueror of the whole world. We know that they didn't conquer the whole world. So, but that I think is you don't say they're lying, but it's a question of how they are used to in literature. It's just the cultural practice of calling them Bhumipati or Bhuvanapati or things like that. When coming to their own valor and their own practices. So I would really say those things as like intentionally lying, but it's more of a stylistic hyperbole. So that's one thing. And sometimes people have historians have said that okay, King A claims that okay he overthrew the other, but King B says he overthrew the other. So there may be conflicts. So we don't know. So or maybe there was a fight. There were multiple instances where they sort of engaged with each other, and then both may be true, both may be false. We don't know. So that is one. And the other things where a lot of historians have claimed many of the inscriptions as fake or spurious, particularly coming to copper plate pranks. This is in Karnataka. It happened to with what is it? With Ganga inscriptions. Ganga's ruled for a very long time, from I think 300 CE to 700-800 years. They ruled South Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, parts of Tamil Nadu, and they have left a large number of copper plate inscriptions. So many of them, historians say they don't date to that particular day. I mean, the style of the script doesn't match with whatever day it is saying. But as I said, some of these may be recopied later on with their current script standards, right? If I'm writing today, I'm not writing like 500 years ago. But if I have to actually copy a document from then, and if I'm writing in my script today, it will look different. But if I want to keep that material intact, I have to write that particular date only. So they may have been written later, but not all of them may have been written for ill intentions. That is what I can say.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
So
Sure.
a follow-up question to that is, so how do you validate the truthfulness of an inscription?
I think I'm not a historian. I think people go with many of these things. One is how does the script look? How does the grammar look? And many times the forgeries have lots of errors. So that's one thing they will go by. If somebody is doing a hit job, they are more likely to make those kinds of mistakes. Many times they are. They may, if they use a word or concept that was not known at the time of writing that inscription. So I think that's what they will use that as. But I have listened to some talks where some people believe that some of the work done in like 18th, 19th centuries, claiming some of the inscriptions as spurious or false, have to be revisited because I mean, we have learned so much in the last 200 years, right? So we have to revisit those things to see, does it really make sense to call them spurious, or is there a reason to say whether they are not spurious? I mean, for example, there are people who are saying, many of the inscriptions have been incorrectly dated. Considering, I think Vedveer Arya is one who has made the claim. Maybe I think there are earlier authors also like Kota Venkatachalam who say that there were two different Shaka eras, but now both of them are like incorrectly made as one. So which makes a difference of hundreds of years in many of the inscriptions where they are referring to Shaka era A. But we are all taking from the Shaka era B, which are separated in about 600 years from each other. So that is. I think people are working on some such things, but until anything concrete happens, I will just stick with whatever is the popular or more accepted view of the inscriptions.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else?
Sir, could you share your, let's say, an email ID where I can ask a few questions?
Sure. My email ID is hamsanandi@gmail.com. I'll put it over here on the chat. And you can, I think many of you are connected with me on Twitter, and that's how you came here. If not, if someone has a friend or somebody sent here, you can connect me on Twitter. My handle is Hamsanandi.
Just one question from my side.
Sure.
There's an inscription near our village which is supposedly built by Adi Shankaracharya near Kollur, but there is no such date or period during which the inscription was done. So, is there any way to actually date the inscription, or during what exactly the year was? Are there any ways to do that?
I think for what people use is the style only, because if it doesn't tell a particular year, it's very hard. And sometimes some of the inscriptions what I've seen is it just tells in Bahudanya Samvatsara. That's it. It just gives the Samvatsara, and we know Samvatsaras go every 60 years, right? It's impossible to date that. Recently, actually, I'm telling by reading an inscription from the Harihara temple, and I just saw the picture somewhere, and me and some other friends on Twitter, we read it. It's a short inscription, and we know that by I didn't see it in the epigraphy volume, or maybe I didn't get that particular volume, so we just read it because it was like just 5-6 lines. It was interesting because it had some reference to number and all that. And then by the style, we decided it has to be somewhere either 1270 or 1340, because that around that time, that's I don't exactly remember the date, but 1243 and 1343, sorry, 1373 and 1273 and 60 years later, because the letter looks like that. It doesn't look like the 12th century Hoysala. And we know that the temple at Harihara was built at the end of Hoysala's reign. It has to be so sometime in the 1300s. And if you see that most of the calligraphy, nice calligraphy from Hoysala's was lost during Vijayanagara. So most of the Vijayanagara inscriptions are actually look very, somewhat primitive compared to the earlier Hoysala inscriptions. So this was still in the Hoysala, so I said, okay, it has to be either the 1270 or 1340, but not the later Vijayanagara. So by that, I think people can look at that. When they look at the script, they can sort of tell whether it is from this. I mean, it's not exactly possible, but they can tell whether it is from the 10th century, definitely, and 16th century. That difference is they can definitely tell. But whether they can date within 50 years, I think that's the best they can do. About 50, 60 years, that is what they can say. Yeah. Okay, thank you. If there are no more questions, I'm very happy to have spoken to you all. And now, if you are not connected with me on Twitter, you can please connect me over there. And thanks a lot for being here.